Hi, welcome. A big thank you to everyone that is joining us today, either through LinkedIn or through our community. It's really great that you've joined us for this conversation where we're diving into all things transformation at Bayer. It's been a hot topic for some time, so we're really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. So today joining us, we have Michael. Hi, Michael. So Michael's been the chief catalyst for this DSO, which we're going to dive into a little bit later, DSO. But it's this dynamic shared ownership transition that's been happening. And we've also got Lars. Hello, nice to see you. Who's been leading the pharma division with this as well. Could be some decisions, I don't know. Cool. And we've also got Tim here. He's been providing some external support as well, and especially working with employee representatives. Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation today. And you've got me, Emma, and joining me also is my colleague Pim from Corporate Rebels. We really look forward to taking you through this next 90 minutes. There'll be plenty of time to ask some questions as well as we go along. But I think it's good to kind of dive straight in. Pim, handing it over to you for a little bit.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Pim de Moret, one of the co-founders of Corporate Rebels. For those of you not familiar with Corporate Rebels, we are researching the world's most progressive organizations on how they are reinventing management to allow people to thrive and their businesses to flourish. As some of you might know, we publish books, have a blog, and we have an online platform where we bring together the world's most progressive organizations to learn from each other, share wisdom and knowledge as they progress towards more progressive ways of working. Today, we're going to dive into the story of Bayer, as Emma already mentioned. I'm going to quickly show you what we have on the schedule for today. So it's a rough schedule, might change a bit here and there because we like the free-flowing conversations. We're going to talk first about what is dynamic shared ownership and why is Bayer doing it. Then we're going to zoom into the transformation approach. So what is the journey towards DSO? What change in mindsets is needed? So we're going to take roughly 1 hour for that. And then after 60 minutes, we're going to continue the conversation, but only for members of Corporate Rebels. And then we're going to talk with a more intimate group more in detail about what is leadership in DSO and how to get people on board in a transformation of a company of 100,000 people. Interesting challenge that we're going to talk about in more detail with our members. If you're not a member yet, and I'm going to keep this spam very short, if you're not a member of Corporate Rebels yet, you can do so by going to corporaterebels.com, and on the homepage, we explain exactly what we do, what the benefits are for you, and especially if you're into self-management and self-managing organizations or working in one, then I'm pretty sure we're going to have lots of content and community events that you love to join. But now let's dive in. So Emma, back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Pim. So I think we're going to start by handing it over to Michael. Michael, I know you're probably going to take a bit of a higher level. So yeah, maybe you can kind of kickstart all of this with sharing a little bit and getting people a bit familiar with what DSO is.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emma, and thanks to you and Pim for the invitation to be with you today and to share a little bit about our journey here at Bayer. So for those who don't know, Bayer is one of the world's leading life sciences organizations. Been around about 160 years, about 100,000 people, operating through 3 businesses. We have our crop sciences business, serves farmers. We have our pharmaceutical business serving patients, and our consumer health business serving consumers. And a new CEO joined the company in the middle of last year, the middle of 23, Bill Anderson. And he brought with him quite a revolutionary vision for evolving the organization, really to unleash its full potential. And he christened that dynamic shared ownership. He then invited me to join Bayer and help lead the journey. Bill and I had worked closely together at Roche over the previous 6 years, bringing a version of this into that organization. So we've known each other for a number of years. And what we'll do here is give you kind of a quick sense of what dynamic shared ownership, what DSO is, and why we're doing it. So I'll just spend a few minutes on that at a high level. And then Lars, I'll ask you to bring it to life a bit in terms of within the pharma division, at least what that looks like, if that sounds okay. I was asked to use a couple of slides, so I'll use a couple of slides just to give you a quick sense of what we're talking about. So coming through, okay?
Looks perfect.
Right. So why are we doing dynamic shared ownership? It really is about. I thought your tee up about corporate rebels was very in sync, Pim, and obviously that's why we're here today. It really is about unleashing the full potential of the organization to allow everybody to thrive and to, most importantly, create new levels of value for our customers. So, we want to continue to create world-leading innovation in products and services for our customers, our farmers, patients, and consumers. For our employees, we want people to have unparalleled careers within Bayer, and for our investors in terms of financial performance and return on investment. So this is why we're doing it, ultimately to deliver new levels of value and to unleash the full potential of the organization. And in order to do that, we are shifting from what we refer to as a traditional management system, a traditional command and control organization, to dynamic shared ownership. And this shift really comprises 5 core elements, 5 principles, if you will, of dynamic shared ownership, each of which represents a very fundamental shift in how organizations operate. What we focus on, how we organize and relate, how we create value, how we get work done, and how we show up. So let me touch very briefly on each of those. The shift of what we focus on in traditional organizations, it's really about shareholder value. It's about creating, profits and share and improvements in share price. And it gets translated across the organization, typically into many different types of KPIs that are largely focused on tasks and deliverables. We're shifting to a focus on mission and outcomes. So mission is about the overall aspiration, the value we want to create. We have our mission, our organizational mission for Bayer as a whole, health for all and hunger for none. And then we have missions at each other level in the organization, including each team starting to craft a mission for themselves. And we translate those into outcomes. So outcomes are the actual value we want to create for stakeholders, long-term, mid-term, and short-term. The second shift is how we organize and relate. So traditional organizations really operate as a hierarchy of individuals, we can say. Emphasis on the individual job and responsibility. And it really works through a hierarchy. Who you report to is most important and determines really how everything gets done. And we're shifting to an open collaborative network of teams. So the core unit of work is becoming a team. And we're building, thousands of autonomous self-managing teams across the organization that are cross-functional, that work with high trust and psychological safety, that take on real accountability, and that collaborate horizontally across the organization. The third, shift, the third principle is how we create value. In a traditional organization, it's more anchored around large functions. And hardwired into each of those functions are a whole set of processes and systems designed for scale, which leads to efficiency, but makes it very hard to adjust and adapt. And within the network that we're creating across the organization, we're really focusing 4 sets of teams in order to create value. We're centering on customer teams and product teams, focusing on engaging with customers and developing and delivering products. And those are the core kinds of teams. We'll be setting up about 2,000 customer and product teams across the organization. We're in the process of doing that. We're about halfway done with that process at this point. And then we have technical teams responsible for building capabilities and R&D and product supply and commercial, and enabling teams, aggregating resources in HR and finance and IT and other areas. And these teams flow the capabilities and resources to the customer and product teams. Within every team also, there's a strong focus on value creation. And, who are we serving? What is the value we're creating for them? What are the resources we're using? And how do we do that in a way that creates maximum value for all stakeholders? The fourth shift is really about how we get work done. So there's a shift in traditional organization from, annual planning done in a pretty linear way to working in rapid cycles. So we're shifting the whole company to work in 90-day cycles. Every team and every unit, the whole organization is trying to work in this very rapid 90-day rhythm with a strong emphasis on making quick decisions, testing and learning, and constantly iterating and evolving. So it's really building a learning organization. And at the end of every 90 days, every team across the organization holds a retrospective to reflect on what went well, what needs attention, what are we going to adjust in the next 90 days. And obviously these ladder up to the outcomes that every team is focused on. And then finally, how we show up. This is really about the shift in mindset from what we call a sort of a reactive mindset underpinned by, limiting beliefs. This is showing the kinds of typical mindset you see in a traditional organization of preservation, authority, scarcity, certainty, and conformity. And these are just terms we use to describe these things against each of these 5 principles, and inviting people to embrace, more creative mindsets based on enabling beliefs of possibility, partnership, abundance, discovery, and self-authorship. Underpinning all of this is a new approach to leadership. We talk about VACC, visionary, architect, catalyst, and coaches. Each of these dimensions reflects one of the principles we just mentioned. So as visionaries, leaders help teams focus on mission and outcomes. As architects, they help teams think about how they're going to create value with a focus on customer and products. As catalysts, they help teams work with high accountability and autonomy and collaborate across the network. And as coaches, they help teams operate in those 90-day cycles, constantly learning and evolving. And all of that is underpinned by a creative mindset. So this is just a quick high-level overview of what DSO is. Obviously, there's a very deep body of knowledge and practice around all of this. But Lars, let me hand to you to give you a quick sense of what this looks like in practice within the pharma division.
Yeah, Michael, thanks. I'm happy to share some very concrete examples. Maybe it's helpful for the audience if you go back to that page 3 where we have the overview of the 5 principles, because I will offer you all an example per principle, even though every example I offer to you represents all of the principles, but in a slightly different emphasis maybe. So what does it mean, what we focus on? Focus on the outcomes. So Michael showed you this logic of the mission and then the midterm outcome, long-term outcome, midterm, short-term outcomes. So when we started then working with teams on what is really the outcomes that you go for, some felt, okay, now we have a new definition of our objectives. We need to rewrite our objectives in a different format. That is to some extent true, but that's not the power of this new approach. The approach is really, we focus on the outcomes. So we look at what really matters. Let me give you the example of one of our key oncology products, Liberating, where we've just had a set of new clinical data coming out. So in pharmaceutical industry, clinical data, phase 2 or phase 3 data in oncology, when you can prove that the product prolongs lives of people, is the biggest moment you have. And you want to translate those clinical data as quickly as we possibly can into an indication so that doctors can start prescribing the product for the patients and start saving lives. Now, in anticipation of this data reveal coming, and then this process of how fast do we get it to the regulatory authorities that they can review and approve, the new Becker team in the new setup went into saying, so if we focus on the outcome to get this set of clinical data as quickly as possible in high quality to the regulatory authorities, what do we really need to do out of all what we've been doing so far, and what could we possibly drop because it more served maybe internal purposes than really the outcome. And they found out that there were layers of different reviews always done in these processes, layers in the hierarchy. Every level of hierarchy wanted to have their reviews. There was maybe cross-functional governance committees that wanted to look at it. And they really went and said, what we absolutely need to make sure we have the quality and the speed. And took out lots of internal steps and took out, to give you a number, 800 documents that would have been otherwise created purely for internal purposes that weren't related to outcome. So when you challenge this document and said, where does this help getting this faster in quality to the regulatory authorities, nobody had an answer. Skip it. That is the power of outcomes and wording them. And that's where this focus shapes and changes the organization. So that's the first example for this piece here. If you look at the second piece, how do we organize and relate? This is about collaboration in teams and across team. Michaels was saying teams collaborate horizontally. They don't always need hierarchy. In the past, it was always the hierarchy that coordinated between them. They don't need that anymore. They shouldn't even try and use it. They should just coordinate between themselves. A great example is another product launch where we had a new formulation for our eye product, Eylea, a high-dose formulation. And we got a real hiccup because some of our suppliers in that product supply manufacturing process had a warning letter from the FDA, the US regulatory authority, and it threatened to delay the whole thing. Once this was cleared, everything was thrown in turmoil. Once this was cleared, we had a major setback in terms of the timelines, and the teams were given the freedom to not go through a hierarchy again, but to relate directly to what needed to be done. An enormous energy built up between them, and we could eventually achieve our original timelines. And again, start treating patients really in a record time. It's the beginning of this year that this started. And it was that very open collaboration between the teams, listening well to one another, not one pushing something on the other, but listening well to get the things right together. So this is how we organize and relate and do not refer back to hierarchy. How do we create value? Again, by not necessarily looking at what's the budget that we need to fulfill, but by looking at where is maybe the unmet customer need that we have. And it relates also, my example relates also to the same eye product, Eylea, which is actually an injection into the eye, so it's not an easy thing. Sorry, no, I'm mistaken now. It's not eye product, sorry, that I meant to refer to. It's hemophilia, where patients inject themselves. So bleeding patients inject themselves to prevent bleedings. And in one situation in Italy, they often need to use 2 vials for that injection. So the local team had always complained. The customers are complaining about that. It's not easy on them. What can we do? Can we change the vial formulation? Can't we do bigger vials? And Global said, oh, yes, we can. This is very important. It takes until end of 2026, and then you have the new vials. So that was always frustrating on our own people in the country and on the customers, on the patients, because it was really tedious on them. With the new freedoms of working differently and doing stuff whenever it's medically and customer-wise indicated, they started thinking, how can we help them deal with the 2 vials if we can't change the 2 vials into 1? And they created something very simple, a holder that is printed for the 2 vials, that is printed by a 3D print, very simple process. Piece costs €6. And they created this, they clarified that with their local medical affairs for quality again, and making sure that nothing wrong is happening with the patients, and went into using this for patients, taking it to patients. Feedback from patients has been, wow, you as a company really have us in mind. Admittedly, they would probably have preferred the bigger vial, but they saw that this really helps in holding these vials, and the whole process gets much easier. And in past, introducing this, the Italy team would have taken them a year and a half minimum to go through all the other processes. Medical affairs would have gone to regional medical affairs, would have gone to global medical affairs. Hierarchies have an inbuilt tendency to reduce or avoid risks. So it could have well failed in the process, in the nowhere somewhere. It didn't in the new setting. And it's really been a breakthrough also in the market position that we have there. How do we get the work done? It's all about being fast, not trying to do this Italy tool there. It's called Froggy, but because it sort of has a little bit the impression of a frog's face. Not planning this to the very end and last detail, but getting going, testing it out, learning, adjusting, going on. We had a tendency in this company, and I think we have it in many big companies, to always try and plan perfect and towards the end. We do this with our strategic planning. We do this with our operational planning. We try and plan a whole year, 18 months before it finishes. So in the middle of the year, we plan the next year. We are doing away with this. Not completely yet, but we're in the process of doing away with this. And rather looking at what we need to do and want to do in the next 90 days. How does this, if we project from the past, what is happening in the next 90 days, how can we influence that? How can we change it towards our objectives in a better way? And 90 days later, we can adjust again. So we're not trying to describe a future that we don't know yet, but to deal today with a clear view of our outcomes that we have in mind. So these 90 days matter a lot. And also we have this flow of the resources to where they are best needed. So our US commercial team have a fantastic process. They call that the brand marketplace, where people who used to be dedicated to individual brands in the past, and they were locked in boxes in an org chart. Now they're all one group. The group discusses what is the priorities for the next 90 days. And then they position themselves in a room to try and support these priorities. So they allocate themselves to where they think they can add biggest value and move the overall effect that Bayer has for our customers, our patients, move that best possibly forward in the next 90 days. So again, 90 days helps for budget allocation, but also people and internal resource allocation towards that end. And it creates the level of abundance for the products where everybody agrees this is priority, or for the activities, not products necessarily, where everybody agrees this is priority. And through that increases the flow and the impact. And then how do we show up? This is so important. It is not steered, not in narrow hierarchical processes, but in the teams. And in the teams, when you don't have the bosses who watch out, are you doing everything right? And yes, I approve, I don't approve. There are no bosses who approve. It's the teams that say we do this. And the teams can only do this with confidence if they have listened to everybody who has the cross-functional perspectives. So having everybody chime in, doing rounds and making sure that really everybody speaks out is so important, that feedback is there. And you know this from all the theory on dysfunctional teams, or the Anthony models and others, how important it is to create the trust and to have everybody really chime in, commit, and be results focused. And that's what we support with this principle, and where we see a huge difference. So recently I was in Portugal, visited our pharma team there, and they had made such a progress over the last years in terms of developing that, the way that they collaborate in their teams, the openness they have, the fun, the joy that they have, the feedback they get from their customers, their business development is fabulous versus also other countries. So they're really doing very well. And the best thing I heard there was one colleague saying, you know what, since we work this way, the Sunday evening blues is gone. So you see the power of this. So that's the examples I wanted to share quickly.
Nice, thank you. If it's okay with you, maybe we'll just do a couple of questions now before we kind of dive into the how this happened. Pim, are there any that you have to kick us off?
Yeah, and I saw an interesting question coming in that was about the reduction in management layers. Of course, an interesting topic for people keen about self-management. So 2 questions in one. I know not very journalistically sound, but I'm going to try it anyway. Can you please explain the reasons why 6, 7 management levels are needed? So you mentioned you were going from 12, 13 to 6 to 7. So that's question number 1. Why 6, 7? And then what are concrete examples of what managers stop doing? Concrete examples of what managers who stop being managers will do. Oh, you're muted, Michael.
Yeah, let me maybe pick up the first one, and then Lars or Tim, if you'd like to comment on this on the second one. So leadership remains an important part of DSO and buyer. You can't operate a global Fortune 500 organization in the complete absence of leadership. But it's a very different type of leadership. So it's really a servant leadership. Leaders are there to support and enable teams rather than to direct and control the teams. And we can talk a bit more about exactly what that looks like. The shift to the next a fewer layers of leadership is really our first iteration. Over time, that may get even further streamlined, but it's already a significant shift. And each of those levels of leaders is looking at a different level of aggregation of the system. So ultimately, we're going to end up with around 4,000 or 5,000 pretty autonomous teams. But those teams are then working in units, basically, in networks, and those aggregate ultimately to the whole company. And you need leadership at each level. So we need leaders looking at buyer as a whole. We have the board of management; they're looking at buyer as a whole, the whole system. And then you need leadership at the level of each of our 3 divisions, and so we have leadership teams there. And then within a division, there's like major units. There's major regional units. There's major units around R&D and product supply and so on. We need leadership teams, of those major units. So at each of the levels, you have leaders, but their focus really is around, sensing the system, guarding the system, and enabling and unleashing people. So it's a very different, again, construct of leadership. And our focus is to push as much accountability into the teams as possible. So we're constantly questioning, like, why does this need to be done at a leadership level, and could this be done, at more a team level in the organization? Lars, what would you add?
Yeah, I can give you an example, and that explains also then Michael's points more. Let me take again a couple of country organizations do that. I know research does this also with portfolio reviews. So typically, when brand managers need to plan for the next year, and they come to the leadership team in the country and say, here is my pitch for my brand. I need that much money to be able to do that. And the next one comes, I need to be able, and they all come and do this. And who makes the decision? The leadership team or the country head for the pharma business makes the decision at the end of the day. That's the normal model. That's how we've done it for decades. We're not doing this anymore. We ask the teams not to present just in front of the governance committee, but to one another, so that all the teams see what is the priorities. And then maybe this amount of money is there, or maybe later on we don't even say this amount of money is there, just do what you need to do. But we say, so if this amount of money is there, how do you distribute it? Why would the leadership team need to make the decision? The teams amongst themselves, they can make the decision. They just need to know that they should. And we're never asked in the past. And they need in that moment, of course, not to just be myopically focused on their brand, but rather take the perspective of what's the best thing that we as Bayer can do for our patients in the next 90 days, and focus on that. And they will naturally do so. It's not a question. It's the framing that we create for that. It's this kind of works that we create for it that leads to it. And here's what the managers stop doing. The leaders stop doing this, making decisions. But they look for, is this interaction happening? Do they have all the information they need to have to make the decision? Traditionally, with aggregated information in the hierarchy, only higher hierarchy had all the information. Now we need to make sure that the operational teams, we want to make decisions, have that information. So that's work that we need to do as managers and leaders to make sure they have. So we observe this, and when it happens, and we feel in the end of the day, and I know this invariably, all the teams that did this way now in the countries or in other situations for portfolio reviews were very happy with the results. So it was never like, oh, no, sorry, the teams make mistakes. We needed to intervene as managers or leaders. No, that never happened. The teams aren't stupid. They do the right things when you give them the space for it. And the task of leadership is to arrange for it, make it happen, and in the evening go home and be proud that you weren't needed any further than that. It's a little different from saying, hey, I told them what to do, they've done it, we have achieved it, towards, well, I'm so proud. of what the team was able to do. And I know I helped here and there by making it happen. But that's the new way to enjoy your world and be proud of your contribution as a leader in such a world.
And maybe just to add a thought from a more external perspective, and Michael and Lars actually both mentioned it, coming from 10 years of self-organizing in our little company, and you look at all sorts of models, holacracy, sociocracy, all sorts of models that Pim, you have on your blog, right? It's just across the value chain, there will be dependencies, there will be interdependencies, there will be links and interfaces and all these kind of things. All sorts of different models, you call it differently. You call it lead link, you call it circle link, you call it circle lead, you call it circle coordinator, you call it whatever you want. And it's basically the same model here. The only thing that we're doing, and I think, Michael, you can probably comment from your past experience as well, is for most of the people coming from more traditional management ideas, that's so radically different. It makes sense to steer it centrally, to create some kind of a common language and a harmonization across the system. Because otherwise, the 4, 5, 8,000 teams will come up with their own model, which would make it really difficult to just bring it back together, right? So while people here on the chat might think, well, it's not true self-organization, I would argue if you want to turn around 100,000 people, Fortune 500, you need to give it a bit of structure and not just let loose based on 5 principles or something, because then the only thing you'll create is chaos.
And 1 year into this now, because I think it was autumn of last year, right, that the announcement for DSO was made. Where do you stand now? How has the progress been so far? Because what you mentioned, Lars, is quite a big change for people as well. Instead of going home with the idea, I had a great day, I told my people what to do, to providing the space for people to thrive and really stepping back as a leader. How's that going so far with all the teams, with the managers that have to reposition themselves?
Can I give a quick answer, then Michael, you maybe go further? So the quick answer is, and I think it's a quote from Gary Hamel of Humanocracy, the visible changes take a year, and we've been a lot active in reorganizing and creating this different spans of coaching versus the span of control before and so on. That's the visible changes, and we are there. By the end of the year, we're mostly done with it. It creates this danger that people think we are done. We're not. We've done this one step. And the invisible changes, all the changes in behaviors, take 5 years. We are at the beginning of that work. So teams are at different places, definitely. But I wish the whole organization to really understand this is a big second step. Michael, maybe you want to dig deeper.
Yeah, look, I as you intimated, I've worked with over 100 companies over the last 18 years, sort of learning and applying and building the principles and practices that are now DSO. But what we're doing at Bayer is definitely groundbreaking. I've worked with probably 30 of the Fortune 500 to bring these kind of principles into at least part of the organization. But I've never seen an organization commit to do this enterprise-wide at every level. So, the progress so far, we think is absolutely remarkable. It's ahead of where we expected to be at this point. We started actually in June last year, so we're about 15 months in or so at this point. And but as Lars said, there's a long way to go. Just to frame very quickly, so we really are undertaking a pretty fundamental system change. It's not just traditional restructuring. We can talk more about that, but just to the question of where are we? So we think about it in 3 phases. So the first phase essentially, ended for most of the organization at the end of Q2 of this year. And there we did a combination of what we call front runners. So we set up nearly 100 of these self-managed teams in every part of the organization in every region to start testing and learning this new way of working. And in parallel, we did the high-level architecture, the high-level design of the whole new operating model enterprise-wide. And we had over 1,000 leaders involved in co-creating that. And then, phase 2 really got started in parts of the organization in Q2 of this year, but, very much became the primary focus for everybody from the beginning of Q3. And that's really about rolling out the architecture, so implementing the architecture, if you will, enterprise-wide, standing up this new organization, as Lars mentioned, and in parallel doing what we call accelerate to impact. So this is building that proficiency in at least the early adopters and parts of the organization that are really excited to lean in and really bring this to kind of full impact. And then, yeah, it'll take several years to really get to full realization, which will, we hope to see that starting to happen in 2026 and beyond. So to give you a sense of kind of where we're at and what we're focused on now.
Great, yeah. I love how bold the idea and the ambition is as well, right? It's such a huge company to move so quickly and to really focus first on that transformation in processes and architecture and structure, and then figure out a way to also support people to thrive in that new system. So one important question that's has been on my mind since I first heard about the initiative. So we, besides Corporate Rebels, we also have an impact fund, so an investment firm where we buy traditionally managed small, medium-sized businesses, and we then transform them into self-managed companies. So similar to what Bayer's doing, but very much on a smaller scale. We also do the same thing. So first, changing the process and the structure takes about half a year for these smaller companies, and then you have to train people to thrive in a system like that. We have one very important core principle, which is we never fire anybody for economic reasons. Why? Because we want to build trust in the organization, and we feel people are becoming very scared and fearful if we cannot kind of guarantee that. At Bayer, you're quite clear also that there is a need for this 2 billion in saving, which is part of the program as well. I always get a bit skeptical if I hear that the companies want to flatten the organization. Mark Zuckerberg said it last year about Facebook. We're going to flatten the organization, increase the span of control, so we can cut costs and be more profitable as a company. How do you avoid that kind of fear in people when you go into a transformation like this? And how do you ensure that people don't feel it's just a cost-cutting exercise?
That's a great question, and it's come up a lot, in the organization. The reality is that through dynamic shared ownership, we're seeking to become, a lean, fast, customer-centric, and innovative organization. So all of those things are critically important. The lean part of that is also reality. So the reality is that relative to the productive work we need to do, as Lars has kind of illustrated through some of the examples he gave, we've been a bit overstaffed. We've had too many people in sort of management and administrative roles, and we needed to address that balance. We've had a number of what we refer to as sort of micro teams, where you get like 2 people reporting to one manager, and as Lars explained, that creates a situation where you get many levels of approval and things really slow down with all those different layers. So the hierarchical command and control system in any large organization, including a Bayer, has been developed over decades, and these the bureaucracy and administrative processes are very hardwired into the system, and there's a whole lot of jobs that have been created and tasks that people do as a result of that aren't directly value creating. In Hamel and Zanini's research, they describe how they looked at a number of large organizations and how they come up with a number of something like 40-50% of management effort, administrative effort is probably not necessary. There's not really kind of value creating. And that sort of roughly approximates what we're discovering at Bayer. So there is a significant shift in leadership. There's a streamlining in leadership. A number of people who were in management roles are becoming entrepreneurs in our micro businesses, in our entrepreneurial teams. There are some people that are exiting the organization because we've just been overstaffed. And that is it's just a reality that we inherited, right? It's something that's built up over decades. And again, it's a very common pattern you see in large companies. You won't see it nearly as starkly in the small companies that you referred to, Pim. I've also worked with 40 or 50 startups and small companies over my career, and it's a very, very different dynamic. Yeah, but when you're dealing with a large Fortune 500 enterprise, you just have layer upon layer of the sort of bureaucratic and administrative activities that are built up, all with good intent. So no one ever comes and says, let's create bureaucracy for the sake of it. But it is complex. It's complex when you're trying to guide and steer a very large global organization. We serve over 400 million customers around the world. We're in the business of helping feed the world and bringing health to the world. This is an accountability we take very, very seriously. Everyone at Bayer takes it very seriously. And so we want to focus on that. We want to unleash the organization to do that. And yeah, so there are some adjustments we're going to need to make as part of the streamlining to allow that to happen. The reality is, though, that most of the value that's going to be created over the next, say, 5 to 10 years will be, innovation and sort of top line growth. It will be more deeply understanding our customers, coming up with new solutions, innovating new business models, helping to shape the ecosystems, the healthcare and agribusiness ecosystems within which we operate in, more than 100 countries around the world, etc. So so all of this needs attention, and we need to be responsible and take accountability to deal with both top line and bottom line in order to bring this into being. This is not a fanciful theoretical exercise, right? We have a deep accountability and commitment to help this, legendary organization really fundamentally transform to become the world's greatest life sciences organization and to bring, new levels of value to all of our stakeholders. And we take that pretty seriously.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I've got a couple of questions. Maybe realize like how this is unfolding on a day-to-day basis, also inspiration changes perhaps. So how do people get to be in a particular team, or how is it kind of determined who is on what team? And it also maybe links a little bit into another question we had coming in, is can team members move fluidly? So if they have more expertise or values, is that a possibility? So a bit more practical, like how does that look?
Shall I take a step at it?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So this still differs in different places, right? I gave you the example of what the US commercial team is doing, where people really flow to the activities that are priority and the common view. And then the teams are coming into being through that. We are creating an IT support tool, talent marketplace, where people can be informed about and see projects that are looking for support and hopefully flow there, but always need to also see what they're leaving behind. So organizations learning in this direction. Yeah. In our global product team settings, we have this since 2.5 years in pharma at least. And so even prior, we had it that the teams come together. There's no reporting lines between them. They just come together, but they are the decision-making body in the end. And they pull in the expertise that they need into the teams at this stage. So some of these flow elements were there before. But we're not yet in a situation where we can say everybody just looks around and flows to where they think they can add most value. It's the vision. When we get there with a company of 90 or 100,000 people, we will see, but we're on the path getting closer to it, and it's very different from the past already.
Great.
Yeah, one quick add is, again, these are things that are literally in progress and we'll be deploying into next year. But, by the end of next year, we hope to be in a position where this is largely working in most of the organization. We're implementing a system where people really become much more self-authored in their careers. So really think about what is their passion, what is their aspiration, what do they dream of doing professionally, and then to map that out and then to marry that with the talent flow that Lars just described, so that people have a strong have a lot of clarity around what they personally are seeking to accomplish and how they want to contribute, and then they marry that with the reality of the teams and what are the skills different teams need and so on. And through the systems we'll build, there's like this constant balancing essentially, where people are pursuing their careers and teams are getting the people that they need to fulfill their missions. And there's a constant dialogue essentially going on within the organization to ensure that that's in balance. So it's not simple to accomplish, but we're putting in place very practical tools around that. And then there's a lot of personal skills people need to develop in order to make the system work.
Great, thank you. And another question was coming in. I mean, launching a couple of thousand of small autonomous or self-managing teams, how you like to call it, that's pretty big. What kind of support are these teams getting? Are there some like specific supporting teams? What does that look like to help them thrive in this environment?
Well, let me, I'll give you a quick answer, and again, we can dig into it more if you're interested. So we built a community of over 200 practitioners, we call them. These are folks who are largely dedicated to DSO, and who are working with teams to kind of launch them and to help them learn and apply the principles and practices of DSO. We're amplifying that with a community of what we call champions. So DSO practitioners really focus on the front runner teams, the high leverage teams, if you will, key leadership teams and key product and customer teams and other teams as they get started. And then we amplify through champions, ultimately with the aspiration to have a champion or a DSO enthusiast, if you will, in every team. So there's actually someone in every team who is most passionate about DSO and who's learning constantly about DSO. And then we're supporting that with a pretty broad-based learning, capability building set of activities, for everybody. So a lot of self-learning programs are already available. There's formal learning courses that we're developing and rolling out in different parts of the organization. We're putting a big emphasis on peer sharing and learning. So teams educating each other. In pharma in the US, for example, we have, I think it's around 68, 70 customer teams, Lars, if I remember correctly. So we might find 10 of those are sort of the early adopters and really get proficient, and then they help the others learn, supported by practitioners and by champions. So these are the different mechanisms we're putting in place to support the teams.
Nice. Maybe just one more question on that before we maybe tap a little bit more into mindsets. Yeah, the idea of a champion, that's nice. So it kind of goes from these practitioners and that's shared with the teams, each having a champion. Do you ever find that hierarchy sneaks in with that position? I know the intention is always not there, but some people can't help it where, yeah, it's all done with good intentions, but before you know it, you kind of feel like you have this hidden hierarchy, like sneaking back in within a team. Have you experienced that? And if you have, how have you dealt with it?
Look, everybody's on a journey, right? This is something unprecedented that hasn't really been attempted before in the enterprise world, as far as we know. And that means we hold everybody with compassion and not judgment, and we invite everybody to learn and become proficient in the new mindsets and ways of working. And we understand if people aren't quite there yet. And this is true within the practitioner and champion community, never mind the broader community of leaders and colleagues across the organization. We don't really see a lot of hierarchy amongst the practitioners and champions in reality. We do see a lot of muscle memory amongst, leaders. We have over 10,000 leaders in the organization. And there's a good way to go for people to learn and become proficient in the new mindsets and ways of working. So there's plenty of hierarchy across the organization at this point. anecdotally, we think about a third of the organization right now is excited about and really leaning into DSO. There's a third that's pretty hesitant and kind of anxious, and there's a third that's kind of waiting to see what the other 2/3 do, basically, which is more or less representative of any large organization going through a pretty fundamental shift. Lars, this resonate?
Yeah, no,
with what you're saying?
absolutely. I mean, I think there's always this risk of hierarchy shining through and being maintained, or maybe new shapes and forms of hierarchy. So the way that we have taken this is the question you had earlier, Pim, of saying, so reducing layers, and isn't that a cost-cutting exercise? I'm always worried when people in the first sentence of describing of what we do talk about reducing layers, because this is a wrong way to look at it. If you just reduce layers, hierarchy survives 100%, because you take out some of the hierarchy, but you don't change the rest. So that's not what we do. We basically take out all the old leadership mentally, not necessarily the people, but the leadership roles, and replace it by very differently shaped and defined roles of leadership. Michael had that in his part of talking about the VACC, visionary, architect, catalyst, and coaching. So leading not from the front, but from the background, from the behind rather. And I described a bit of that roles. With everybody now who is taking on these new roles that maybe have been in the company before, because I mean, how else should we ever do this now? We can't have everybody come from outside. We wouldn't want to. And many of the people that we have in leadership roles have had in the past were very good leaders. And it's none of their mistake that the system has converted into what it has converted into. Any of these measures that built the old system were always good intended. Just the totality of it doesn't fit today's world. So give everybody the chance, have the compassion, and have the support to them to develop into it. But is it easy? No, it's not easy. And is it easy for all employees to change into these roles of in the teams, making their decisions, not having the possibility even to go to the boss and say, hey, do you agree? Oh, I have a wonderful idea, actually. Do we have any budget? Can I do it? All these questions go away. It's you agree with your peers in the team. This is the right thing to do, and you do it, and you live with the consequences. You have ownership for your decisions. You're like an entrepreneur. Sometimes people say, oh, people don't want that. I say, we don't know. Because we have never given them the possibility to act in this way. We need to give them the space and the time to step up to it and to feel the fulfillment that comes out of it and be further motivated. Like I've certainly seen in parts. When people display the energy that I've seen in this one smaller country where I was recently, in Portugal, and certainly the case in other countries, when you see that, you know that they can learn it and they thrive on it. It's not there from one day to the other. It's not a switch that you can switch over. So it's demanding on everybody, and it's rewarding for everybody. And it needs a little bit of time to get there.
And it's really remarkable how it's, as we say, it's definitely a journey, and there's a lot of learning to do. What's equally remarkable is how quickly more and more people are gravitating to this. So over the last few months, I've been with teams in Beijing and in Nairobi and in Sao Paulo, like all over the world. And in all those places, I've met with, frontline customer product teams and our manufacturing plants, our enabling teams, who are speaking with deep emotion about how profoundly this is changing their lives. This is allowing them to thrive and succeed in a way they could never have imagined before. It's even impacting their personal lives, and it's helping them think differently about how they relate to their loved ones, and opening up kind of new possibilities. So it's a long road, but every day we're seeing, increasing progress and success and things to celebrate as more and more people come to really understand and practice this.
That's very, very true. I experienced that too. And at the same time, it's also true, and we should be honest there, that for many in the organization, they are not there yet. Their parts of the organization aren't there yet. This positive experience isn't necessarily there, but there's a lot of uncertainty. Since a year and a half, we've been talking about that since Bill Anderson joined us. There was a lot of promise of everything's changing. So far, not everything has changed, even though maybe organizations change. But I mean, there's this ambiguity, first of all, with the reductions, Pim, you spoke about that we have in the same, do I have a job? And once this is clarified, it's this, and how does this work now? What is expected from me? Versus I flow to where I add value, it's a long way to go. So we have to acknowledge that too, that again, it's not easy. It is rewarding. It takes time. And it may be just for many people at this time really difficult to find the right orientation. We're very confident we are getting there. We're asking them for a bit of patience. But I think we should just acknowledge this piece also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I really love what you said. So I love the openness of the challenges that are part of this, the fact that you're not there yet and it's a long journey ahead of you. The fact that there are some serious consequences for some people in the organization as well. I think it's a important part underlying this, and that really shows, I think, the support for people in the organization to go on that journey together with you. And it sounds maybe a bit kumbaya, especially what you said on the fact that people change at work and then they take those changes outside and also relate differently to the people they care about at home. But we see the same thing happening in many of these self-managing organizations. It really changes the fundament of people by the journey they go on as they are part of these organizations, where they are in a position where they are free, but also highly responsible and accountable for the work that they do. So it completely changes people. So we're going towards the end of the first hour, and then we're going to continue in a more intimate session with Corporate Rebels members in more detail. So to wrap things up for this LinkedIn Live session, could each of you share the one piece of advice that you would give others on the self-management journey? Michael, starting with you.
Probably two things come to mind. One is to really be clear about why you're doing it, and what you're seeking to accomplish, which is invariably about creating more value for customers and other stakeholders. So to really anchor in that and be clear about that, and invite everybody in the organization to focus on that aspiration, that vision, and how everybody will be vastly better off as a result of this. That feels very important. The other is that this is all about learning and becoming proficient in a very different way of thinking and a way of operating. So ultimately, it's all about proficiency. And the more people at every level can learn and understand and internalize and become proficient in this very different approach, the more successful you'll be. So in an organization like Bayer, people have spent decades essentially becoming highly proficient in the traditional management system. We're now bringing in a sort of a different construct. And so as we've emphasized, it takes a bit of time, but really being focused on building that understanding and proficiency, being patient with people and inviting them to really build that is really critical to enable everybody to thrive and for this to become successful and ultimately deliver the value that we're seeking to accomplish.
Thank you. And for you, Lars?
Be open, be curious, and be excited about it. We know from the experience in Bayer that where we really do it, it works. And it's great on people.
Thank you. Tim?
I guess for me, I'll go a bit towards the community, because I also saw some questions on LinkedIn and chat and everything. Is like Michael said, right? That's unprecedented attempt. And I'm calling it an attempt because we have, a few years to go likely. Well, really, if people in the community go like, well, but if you don't do A, then you're not really truly B, right? And I think that's completely wrong. Two, show me one company which has a heterogeneous business model across 100,000 people in 126 or so countries, right? Last, Michael, and where this has even been undertaken. So I think also in the community, maybe a bit more compassion would help here and there, and then also just acknowledge that it will take time, right? And it's not like if you don't do A, then it's actually not true. I think it's actually quite amazing, and I'm really grateful to be part of that journey as well, because I think it is a radical approach, especially if you look at Fortune 500s. And certain systems, we try to dismantle the Bayer system. You can't dismantle the stock exchange market system. You can't dismantle some of the other systems that we actually play in. So there is always compromises here and there, and I think we just should acknowledge that. So that's just maybe my little word to the community, being part of that one for a few years myself. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Much appreciated. Okay, we're going to wrap this part up. Everyone who joined us on Zoom, stick around. I'm just now going to disconnect the LinkedIn Live session. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Hope you found it insightful. I know by all the questions and comments that came in, there's way more to discuss. We're going to make a bit of a write-up for our blog on this webinar and a bit more info that we have on Bayer's DSO. And then hopefully we'll organize something soon to dive into even more detail on this as we keep following the journey ahead. So thanks everyone on LinkedIn for watching, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye. All right, I think I've disconnected them now. So Emma, back over to you to focus on the next topic at hand.
Yeah, I was just thinking, although I just saw one coming in from Alex in this group chat now as well, and it's more looking at how we're rolling it out again. So someone was looking for more advice on, is it better to have pilots or areas to focus and learn from to begin with, or what's your experience with rolling this out? Can you kind of maybe share a little bit more deeper into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let me kick this off. So through working with many companies, we've come to recognize that the innovation adoption life cycle is a real thing for those who are familiar with it, which basically says that in any population, there's something like 15% early adopters, then there's like 35% are the early majority, then you get the 35% late majority, and then you get the 15% sort of over my dead bodies, sort of the laggards. And we found it helpful to focus there. So, in a number of other organizations, as well as with Bayer, there's a tendency to start with the biggest resistors, the biggest naysayers, and we find it actually doing the reverse is much better. Look for the early adopters and start there. Yeah. So, and actually, if you find a combination of early adopters who are personally enthusiastic about it and business need and opportunity, then that's an ideal place to focus. So we started with the front runners, as we mentioned. We also, as we did the high level architecture, we actually started with the leadership teams who were keen to get started first, and then later got to like all the leadership teams. We had dozens of leadership teams involved in co-creating the overall architecture for their part of the organization, but that happened over like 9 months. And so some got started and then others got inspired. So the idea of starting with the enthusiastic early adopters is very powerful, because it creates like stories and realities that then starts rippling out across the organization. And we continue to do that. So as we now think about, we've sort of getting close to activating the whole organization, we're now seeking to, as we said earlier, accelerate to impact, build proficiency. Like, where do we focus to build proficiency? Let's focus again on the ones that are getting most traction, that are most engaged, which for us right now is probably 15,000, 20,000 people. It's a lot of people, right? Even though that's maybe 20% of the whole organization, if we can get them really working well and starting to deliver, a whole different level of performance and impact, that will continually bring more and more people into the system, essentially, over time.
So just briefly to add to it, having these front runners last autumn, starting this, and it was very strange because we said, you have more freedoms than you ever had and so on, and the rest hasn't adjusted, but you can do this now. And then we supported them, of course, on that. But it really created the cases of belief for the leadership teams, like the board of management themselves, the pharma leadership team, and the other businesses, crop science and consumer health, and into the organization, because we could share some of these examples. It was absolutely crucial. Had we not had that, the whole belief into this approach would have faltered very quickly, I think, because it would have been so invisible. Now we have that, so we can show it, But as I said earlier, for many, it's still not their daily reality. So that is now the bridging that we need to do.
Thanks, Lars. And to kind of expand a little bit, we have Suzanne asking, how did you take this to the shareholders? What were the key elements of your story to them, and how did they respond?
So at Bayer being a German company, so our supervisory board, our board of directors, comprises 50% investors and 50% employee representatives. So the stakeholder management is actually more complex than for, say, a US-based or a UK-based organization, which is pretty much only needs to think about investors. I think it was a combination of the company is facing a number of very serious issues. So there was universal agreement amongst the investors and the employee representatives that we were facing very major challenges, almost existential challenges, in performance, in litigation in one of our divisions, in a number of other areas, and that something radically different was needed. The supervisory board decided to bring in a new CEO in order to address these issues. And when they met Bill, and he articulated this vision of DSO as the primary vehicle through which we're going to address all of these issues and unleash the full potential of the organization, it really started resonating. So they actually hired him to do this, which was very helpful. Now, the reality was, back in June last year when Bill started and I started at the same time, and we formed the first team of practitioners, and Lars was part of that kickoff meeting. So we've been on this journey together from day one, literally. We kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, a bit tongue in cheek, but we kind of got the reaction from the supervisory board, "Oh, you were serious? You're actually going to do this?" And we said, "Yeah, we're actually going to do this." And so it was a several-month conversation. It wasn't just a one and done. And we needed to articulate in a bit more detail what is it exactly we're proposing to do. And we brought in, as Lars said, some of the front runners so they could kind of experience, firsthand from colleagues about the impact this was already having, for them and their ability to get things done in half the time that they were doing before. Or teams are starting to spend 30% more time face-to-face with customers than they've ever done before. Or teams were coming up with the kind of innovations that Lars mentioned earlier that they never would have even thought about before. So we started getting lots of these stories, and the investors and employee representatives started getting exposed to this. So there was a combination of several months of dialogue, giving them evidence of early traction, and laying out an overall kind of plan and commitment to what we were going to do. And honestly, I think Bill, our CEO, played a decisive role here. He kind of surprised everybody in his ability to engage with our investors, employee representatives, and to help them really see the potential, and to ultimately stack hands very enthusiastically. By the end of the third quarter last year, there was full commitment that this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to build the company over the next few years.
And maybe just to add 2 sentences around the employee representative part of the board, right? Because as Michael said, that's kind of a German speciality in a way. And there's even 2 parts. So one is the Bayer internal ones, right, who are representing through workers' council and all of that hierarchical game. And then there's 3 who coming from the unions. So that's a whole different set of stakeholder groups, of course. And if you've worked in German companies, you had interaction with workers' council and unions, and everyone. There's a typical role. It's us against them. This is the typical setup, for the good and the bad. Right? There's some parts where you could say self-management could go wrong as well. Look at Valve and some of the other examples, right? So there might still be a role in there. And at the same time, I think, Michael, you're right. If I look at July to September last year, then I think the key role was that also employee representatives, unions, and also workers' council figured pretty quickly, oh, actually, Bill's doing things differently. You know, we're all of a sudden invited to meetings that were before totally black box, closed doors kind of stuff. So pretty quickly they got into, well, that's actually not just bullshitting around kind of. There's not the typical game that we're playing. He's actually serious about that stuff. And then I think that was the key moment when they figured, okay, we're actually playing by the DSO rules, also in our engagement with the employer side of things. And I think that was the key moment last year.
What does it look like for employees who want to be one of those front runners? So you have that support from the top. Bill is leading the charge. He's really also leading by example in that, by inviting everybody in, being open, transparent, and connect and engaging with people. But then let's say you're an employee working in one of the teams or divisions that are still working more traditional, and then you'd say, "Oh, we'd love to give this a try." What does that process of onboarding people to the transformation then look like? What kind of resources are there? What kind of training, tools, practices do they get to be able to actually get there?
Lars, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would just be honest on that because it wasn't an open process where we said last year in September, October, whoever likes, and then form teams and do what you like. That would have been completely beyond perception of what was possible. So there was a process of thinking through who would be adequate, who are teams that are probably well advanced, and who in those teams do they have interest in doing stepping up and trying out new things. There was an element of top down in that. We didn't live this from the very first moment in the perfect form, and maybe we could have done a bit better on it. But in the end, the selection of teams went very, very well, and most of them have really done great on it. And now, of course, it's still the same situation that in many areas it starts really working and some it doesn't. And I referred to that before, that people are still confused there and don't know. But there are others who would love to do more, and they are asking for it and looking for it. They try and find the traction on it. It's a dynamic process. It's dynamic shared ownership. It continues. There's no perfect solution. We're just on a strong evolution into that direction. And as Michael was saying, maybe it's a third. Maybe those shares are slightly different. I don't know. And we try and support and have place champions, or champions have often been because they just raised their hands. They thought they would be great at it. So we're trying to build on the energy in the organization, but this idealistic view of everything is self-organized, everything just flows. It's the vision, but it's not the reality today.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of other quick comments. So you've got to meet everybody where they're at, and actually having the leaders initially choose the front runners was very important. It was a way of engaging them, right? Because it was at that point a top-down system. So having them select the front runner, it helped them get confidence in at least supporting this. I think now, just to build on what Lars is saying, so what we say to people is, if you have energy to be like a pioneer and you're part of the organization, firstly reach out to leaders. Right? So we're asking leaders to take accountability to foster this. That's like the first accountability. And if you find your direct leaders aren't supportive, then reach up a bit higher in the organization, because we know the senior leaders are now pretty much deeply committed to this across the organization. Not all of the mid-level leaders yet. That's still work in progress, and that's increasing, and we're making progress every day, but there's still a long way to go there. So that's one. Secondly, reach out to practitioners, reach out to champions, and you're part of the organization. So we have practitioners in every part of the organization, and in every region. We have champions the same. So these are people that you can reach out to directly. I always personally extend the invitation, as does Lars in pharma. Failing anything else, just contact me, and I'll help you, and I'll put you in touch with the relevant part of the organization or the practitioners or champions that can help you. So there's a lot of ways in which we're encouraging people to reach out for help. It's very interesting because it's more the mindset, the volition to do it. That's the biggest barrier, actually. As soon as someone decides that they want to be courageous and to actually do that, they find it pretty easy to get support and help. It's just the traditional mindset of I can't do anything until my boss or manager gives me permission is part of the sort of muscle memory that is still embedded in the majority of the organization at this point. So again, part of the process is we're sort of rippling out those pools of, people thriving in DSO, and that's expanding all the time. And so we're encouraging people to come into that expanding community constantly, and then they'll get the support as soon as they make that choice to want to lean into this.
Yeah, good to hear. And so that's very much also a developing thing, where in the beginning it was maybe a bit more top-down appointed, and now more the opportunity for people to step up and say, I'd love to be a part of this journey. Let's say you talk to your manager or your leader or your leader's leader, and they say, yes, let's go for it, or they connect you to the right practitioners or champions. Then what is the phase after that? So how do you then go from, yes, I want to do this, to actually start putting it into practice? What is the support you get?
So, for most teams, it's anything from a 6-month journey to an 18-month journey or longer to kind of learn and become proficient in new ways of working. So a journey typically starts with some kind of a launch workshop experience. So we get people together for like 2 or 3 days, typically with a practitioner, like a coach or a practitioner or champions, depending on what the team is. And they'll get introduced as part of that experience to the basic principles of DSO. They'll do it in the context of their team. And as part of that initial experience, they'll start setting the first draft mission for our team. They'll set their first 90-day outcomes. A lot of these first 90-day outcomes will be, how do we start working more as a team? How do we actually start accountability as a team? What are the key things we need to focus on to deliver value, and what should we stop doing? So these are the kinds of conversations a team might have in that first kind of launch workshop. And then the practitioner or champion will continue to work with that team over a period of time. Again, typically for at least 6 months, maybe longer. So that's a primary direct vehicle for support. In addition to that, we're increasingly have leaders who are really seizing this and starting to show up as VACC leaders and seeking to be of service to teams. So actually actively working with teams and helping them develop skills and capabilities around what they're doing. And then we have, as we mentioned earlier, like hundreds of pages of materials and self-learning programs and so on, and available to teams. One of the ones we launched at the beginning of the year is called DSO in a Box, which is a self-learning program for teams to learn the basic principles of DSO. What is an outcome and how to set an outcome? And how do you build psychological safety and trust as a team? And what does it mean to conduct a retrospective every 90 days? So some of these basic practices that people can sort of learn for themselves, and then, again, help each other learn. So there's a number of resources and mechanisms that are available to teams on this journey. But for many, there's quite a lot of high touch support from practitioners or champions early on, and then slowly they become more and more kind of self-managing and self-learning.
And how big is this total community of practitioners and champions that are supporting this?
Right now we have, I think, around 250 practitioners and over 1,000 champions. So we want to keep the practitioner community something of that order, we think. Again, we're sensing into it constantly and looking at it every 90 days. But we think it'll be in the sort of 200 to 300 range for the foreseeable future. But we think we could have, 5,000 champions. We don't really know, but it could grow significantly. And this will be in parallel. Again, more and more of our leaders are becoming proficient in the new way of leading, and the more they become proficient, the less need there'll be for champions and practitioners. So we'll keep sensing into that to see what's needed at each stage of the journey.
Okay, then a nice question that came in from Lisa Gill on the difference it has made to you personally. So for both Lars and Michael this question. So what have been your personal challenges and highlights of the transformation so far?
Lars, go ahead.
Happy to go. So for me, I've always thought as a leader that I'm very much a people leader. I'm not the expert on everything, but I'm leading from bringing the people together. And it just was an acceleration of that. But I also thought I'm a leader coach. I'm coaching my people. And when we dug a bit deeper into this, what does coaching actually really mean, and how would we behave as leaders in DSO? I realized that no, I've never been coaching them. I had always good conversations, open conversations. I was listening. I was trying to bring their perspectives together and all these things, but I was never really coaching them. So taking much more time and doing that is a new experience and a very good one, very, very positive. And then moving to this ever more self-organized setup, I find it sometimes still demanding because sometimes the meeting outputs aren't as concrete as I would always have made it happen in the past as a leader. I would always have made sure that we have a clear list of actions. And we have a certain tendency of what is where we want to focus on currently, but that clarity of here's the actions and here's the commitments to it, we don't always get there yet. I think as self-organized teams, you can get there, so we still have to learn. But I find this challenging that this is sometimes more vague than in the past. And it's a learning process for me and for the teams probably as well. I've also levels of insights into myself, into my own reactivity. Where do I react to things? What am I triggered by? And how can I overcome that? So to be much more open, much more in the creative mindset. And things that I've learned there have already also impacted, Pim, you were referring to it, private life. I've had a very positive impact on private life already out of these learnings. Far away from doing it everything perfect in the work. I think it's really a continuous challenge, but I see it just as an opportunity. I just see the whole process towards it as an opportunity of becoming ever better. So there's not a trough that you go through and it's very terrible and then you get out. It's this journey. It's just fabulous and exciting.
Thank you. And for you, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's been the most incredible thing I've done professionally. It's in a lot of ways, it's the fulfillment of what I've been working on for the last 20 years or so. And again, I've had an opportunity to, and really the privilege of working with many great organizations to bring this into large parts of the organization. But I've never had the opportunity to lead a transformation like this for the enterprise as a whole, and to take accountability for it, and to do that in a company that reports to the public markets every 90 days. So being part of that reality, working closely with the board of management, building the practitioner community. We have an aspiration to build the greatest team of transformation practitioners in the world to sort of underpin this. And there's so many incredible colleagues that we have and have attracted in to help do this. And to see the impact it's having on the organization, and ultimately to do all of that in a life sciences organization that is in such a deeply meaningful set of businesses in terms of the contribution we make to the world. I mean, all of that aggregates up to really the most incredible experience, kind of personally and professionally. And there's learning every day, and being of service every day. But it's deeply meaningful and brings me enormous joy in terms of building this in a way that will benefit all the stakeholders of Bayer, but also demonstrate to the broader world that this is possible, that it's possible to build an organization around sort of human-centered principles that, as we say, instead of designing the organization despite what it means to be human, you design the organization around what it means to be human, and let people really thrive and fulfill their full potential, and have that translate into products and services for customers and financial performance for investors and so on, is is quite amazing. So yeah, it's the thrill of a lifetime, the privilege of a lifetime.
And also better personal relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I've personally been on a journey for many years, and so that's been a constant evolution, and this feels like very consistent with that. And it's about being anchored deeply with people personally, with my wife, who's the love of my life, our kids, my father, and our broader family, with our friends, and then professionally with all of our colleagues at work, and just at the end of the day, organizations are human systems. It's all about like us being who we are, and being the best of ourselves is really my personal aspiration and our aspiration, and I experience that every day, which is just a beautiful way to live, and again, it's an honor and a privilege to have that opportunity.
Great, good to hear. Thank you very much. One more question before we have to start wrapping things up. So one question came in from Daniela, which is very much a continuation of what we talked about before. But how do you keep keep the energy high and momentum for the transformation? Because we all know that many of these transformations start very enthusiastically, then we run into challenges, or the initiative just kind of dies out over time. How do you make sure you keep it alive?
So I'll have a couple of reflections. So it's certainly a reality we're dealing with right now. So we've been on the journey for, again, 15, 16 months at this point. And so there is a bit of like DSO fatigue for some people. A couple of thoughts. One is continuing to anchor on our mission and to make sure that we ultimately are delivering more value for customers, for colleagues, for investors and other stakeholders. And to the extent that we're not doing that, we've still got work to do. Secondly, we've really been emphasizing over the last few months that DSO is not separate. The transformation is not separate from performance. DSO is the vehicle to deliver performance. And so understanding that and understanding the connection between the more proficient we get at DSO, the better we're able to deliver results is very helpful. I think the working 90-day cycles is very helpful too, because engineered into the system is a reflection every 90 days of what's going well, what needs attention, what needs to be adjusted. So it becomes part of the operating rhythm of the organization to kind of constantly learn that. And and there's a lot to do still in terms of helping people learn and become proficient and internalize, as we've been saying. And so I think for us as practitioners, for the champions, for the early adopters who are already enthusiastic about this, we need to sustain each other, support each other, and bring that energy to the broader organization. At least these are a few reflections. I don't think we've got a magic answer at this point. Lars, what are your reflections?
No, absolutely along the same lines. I mean, we have been doing restructures in the past every 3, 4, 5 years, and mostly they were accompanied by a culture program. So 3 months you do trainings and workshops, 6 months you talk about it, and after 12 months or 18 months, everything works in the same way as before. This year is very different. We've done a massive reorg, the biggest we've ever done, and most courageous we've ever done. But it's all in vain if now the next 5 years we slow down. So yes, there is DSO fatigue, and behooves, I think, leadership and us as DSO practitioners leading also to maintain the excitement, see the opportunities, use the examples that we see in the company, and then speak to things like that personal benefit you take out of it over time when you open up for it. And there we are at the very beginning of people sensing this. This could be something that develops over time and becomes strong. If you talk too much about that too early, people see this as a threat. We are now beginning to try and transport this from our own experience as really the opportunity it means. And if this then is seen in a larger sense, then we grow from we go from maybe 1/3 to the second third then.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us, your stories, your challenges, your learnings, but most importantly, also your honesty. I think sometimes when we hear these stories, a utopia can be created, and I think it can make it quite inaccessible to people. So from even going through that DSO fatigue or sharing the more top-down decisions that were made at the start, I really appreciate that you share that with us, because I think people can find that a lot more relatable and with the challenges they have going on as well. So I think on behalf of everyone, I could say a big thank you for that. That does bring us to the end of our session today. That 90 minutes has flown by. I could quite honestly sit here and continue asking questions for probably another 90 minutes and much more. It's fascinating to dive into this story and on such scale. So big kudos to you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing it with us. And we really appreciate it. Pim, anything else from you before we say goodbye?
Well, I would echo the same words. So thanks for sharing so openly. It's really interesting to follow the story from the sidelines. And I really think it's really cool and bold what you're working on. And it's really hopefully going to all work out well, so that more companies start to work in the same direction. I think the world needs it, more than just so Bayer needs it, but the world needs it as well. So thanks for sharing so openly, and hopefully being able to reach a couple more people to go onto this transformation journey. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's been a delight to be with you. Thank you for inviting us, and kudos to you for what you're doing as Corporate Rebels. Yeah, it's very aligned with what we're seeking to do. And I think there's a growing, community of like-minded folks around the world that are seeking to kind of reinvent the world of business, the world of organizations, and important that we connect, we learn from each other, and pursue really what is a mighty mission to bring into being a sort of a new era in the way organizations operate and the way value is created in the world. So
you wrapped this session up better than I did. I mean, you can just take my job over here. That was wonderful. Lovely. Thanks, everyone. From that's a goodbye, and we will see you at the next event very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.